In the gods wood the air tasted of iron and leaf mold, and the face in the heart tree bled red tears into the pool that remembered every vow the Starks had ever spoken. Eddard Stark knelt as he had knelt 1,000 times, feeling the damp seep through wool and leather, and he watched the ripples warp the reflection of the white trunk until it seemed the weirwood flexed like a living muscle. The wind crawled among the black branches. Ravens muttered somewhere high and unseen. Winterfell breathed slowly around him, a great old beast asleep. He had spent the morning in the crypts with the dust of kings in his nose and Lyanna's stone eyes on his back. Words he could never say had pressed hot and hard against his teeth until he thought they would break. Words like a sword edge and the memory of blood. When the wind turned, he rose. His boots carried him through a gate older than written names and across the yard where the ravens strut and pecked. He walked beneath a sky hard as hammered steel and let his hands learn again the cold of the world. Stable boys darted like minnows. A smith's hammer talked. A kennel girl sang a snatch of a lament to a hound that died in the last winter. Winterfell moved and murmured. Steady, the only music he trusted. Roderick Castle met him in the shadow of the great keep, mustaches bristling against the wind. My lord, summon the household to the hall, Ned said. The children as well, and send for Maester Luwin. Roderick studied his face a heartbeat, tried and failed to read it, then bowed and turned away. The hall took his breath when he entered, though in truth he had grown up with it. Smoke and banners and noises stacked on noises. The comfort of home and the weight of stone. The carved chairs at the dais had been smoothed by Stark hands long turned to soil. He seated himself beneath the dire wolf of House Stark, his shadow falling across the flagstones in the shape of a man carrying a burden. The first to come was Catelyn. She had the look of Riverrun in her cloak and of Tully water in the blue of her eyes, and there were lines around her mouth that had not been there in spring. She did not speak at once, which told him she was wary. Luwin asked for you this morning, she said at last, standing with her hands folded. A proper lady in a hall of wolves, a raven from the Eyrie. Lisa's grief has curdled into wildness. It curdled long ago, Ned said softly. Sit with me. He patted the chair beside him as if they were still young and uncertain, as if touch could unmake the miles that had crept between them. She did sit, but not close. The children came in a flurry. Robb first, taller since the spring thaw, his red-brown hair a banner of its own. Sansa with a new ribbon she had begged from the seamstress. Arya with mud up her stockings and a stubborn maw, a scratch on her cheek. Bran with the eager feet of 10, Rickon trotting behind him, soot-streaked and sniffling. Theon lounged a pace behind Robb, all grins and careless hands. Jon came last, as he always did, quiet, the white wolf padding at his heel like a ghost that had learned to walk. Ned's eyes found the boys, and something old and cold moved inside him, like a river beneath a crust of ice. When the household had thickened the hall with bodies, stewards and cooks and guards, servants and old men who had earned the right to eat bread under Stark roof for the rest of their days, Maester Luwin came, cap askew, fingers ink-stained to the second knuckle. He raised his head toward the dais in a small query. Ned gave him a nod. My lords, my ladies, Ned began, and his voice carried without effort. He had his father's voice, people said, a road of gravel that men trusted. Winter is coming, as it always does, and I will not live forever. The time has come to set in order what must be set. Robb straightened. Catelyn's fingers bit the wood of her chair. Somewhere amid hanging pheasants and cauldrons bubbling with tomorrow's broth, someone dropped a spoon. Ned did not reach for the old two-handed sword beside his seat. There are oaths that call for steel, but this was not such an oath. The North is a hard land, harder for a lord with his banners scattered and hungry mouths under his roof. I have sons and a daughter old enough to understand weight. I will speak plainly. In this hall and before the heart tree I will ask the king when he comes to grant me boon. I will ask he legitimize Jon. Silence fell as if dropped from a height. Arya's eyes widened, and Sansa's cheeks went pale as paper. Robb's jaw worked once and then locked. Jon's face did not change, but Ghost's ears pricked forward. and the animal's red eyes fixed on Ned, as if the wolf could hear the true meaning hidden beneath his words. Catelyn's breath came sharp. A needle dragged through cloth. "My lord," she said, every syllable stitched tight. "This is no jest." "It is no jest," Ned said. "They will call it an insult," Sansa whispered to nobody and everybody. To Mother, to Robb. "It is a mercy," Arya countered, always ready to unsheathe. "Jon will not go to the wall." Jon said nothing. Luwin cleared his throat. "My lord, the king's writ can lift a bastard into the place of a son, cannot unmake the laws of the realm. A legitimized son is a son. But to name him heir above a trueborn. I know the law." Ned's voice cut, and regret followed it like shadow. He softened it. "I know the law. Laws are bones that keep flesh from becoming a shapeless thing. I will not break them. I will ask the king to legitimize Jon as a Stark. And I will declare before my bannermen that if winter takes me, I wish the North to be guided by the son who best keeps faith and keeps the North safe." He lifted a hand as Catelyn made a sound. "Listen to what I say. I do not make war between brothers. Robb is my firstborn and will sit where I sit and carry my banners and my name. But the boy of my blood and my care who serves the North best will inherit Winterfell, whether the gods gave him birth inside marriage or out. If you find fault, find it with me." Robb's mouth opened and closed. "Father, I mean to do my duty." "I know it," Ned said. "You are your mother's son. You have courage enough for three and fairness in your heart. You will have lands enough and burdens enough without counting this. If I return from the south, this will be talk and then forgotten, and you will be Lord of Winterfell as you have always been meant to be. If I do not return, the North must survive even my mistakes. It must choose not from pride but from need." "Choose," Catelyn said. The word cracked. "You would make them choose between boys? Like crows pecking at the stronger chick." "I would make them choose for the North," Ned said. Jon's voice came then, low and careful, as if he trod a frozen stream and knew how thin it ran. "My lord father, I never asked." "No," Ned said. "You never did." He leaned forward, feeling the eyes of his house on him, and in his mind his sister's fingers were cool on his hand, the blue roses drooping around her hair. "I do this because I must not leave half-truths behind me to rot. When the king comes, I will petition him for your name. I will petition him for a stag's seal, and you will be Jon Stark before these leaves brown and fall." Ghost's breath steamed. Jon's knuckles had gone white around a belt strap. He bowed his head. "As you command, my lord." It was Sansa who began to cry, soft and restrained. Her face turned away so her tears would not be a spectacle. Arya glared about as if someone had made her sister cry, and she could not find them for lack of a visible throat to punch. Catelyn did not weep. She watched Ned with a face he had not seen on her before, the face of a woman looking over a winter river at a man on the far bank, thin and gray and too far for shouting to help. The ripples began in the hall and ran outward through kitchens and the apple yard and the godswood and out along the muddy tracks to the villages that clung to Winterfell like lichen on stone. They came to the ears of small men who had opinions and to the ears of men who wore swords and to ears under golden hair far to the south. This is the trouble with words spoken aloud. They grow legs and go hunting. By afternoon a wind came down from the high moors and rattled every shutter. Jon went to the armory without being told, because work made sense and silence did not. He cleaned his mail and checked the rivets on his vambraces and oiled the leather of his gloves, and he told himself he felt nothing except the smooth familiarity of the tasks in his hands. Ghost lay at his feet and watched the door, tongue lolling like a drenched ribbon. Theon Greyjoy appeared and leaned his shoulder on a beam and watched as if watching were work. "Heir," Theon announced cheerfully, tasting the word. "I always liked the way you moved, Snow. All quiet and careful, like a thief. Now I find out you were creeping toward a chair all along." Jon said nothing, because there were days when Theon's words slid harmlessly off him and days when they wanted to stick and fester. Today they might fester. Theon grinned wider, his teeth white in the lamplight. "Don't glower. I'm pleased for you." I like trouble, and this will be trouble. Gods. The look on the lady's face. Mind your tongue, Jon said quietly. Theon raised both hands. I mean no disrespect. She's your lady mother, if half. Or none. Or what is it now? He chuckled. Shit. I'm making it worse. I'm happy for you, truly. Leave him, Robb said from the doorway, voice tight. Theon rolled his eyes and sauntered away like a cat bored of a bird too far up a tree. Robb came in and shut the door behind him, then stood with his back to it as if he were keeping the world out by force. He looked at Jon, really looked, and in that looking something old and easy shivered. You knew? He asked. No, Jon said. He set the oil rag aside. I never asked for this. Robb's mouth twitched. You always think I am accusing when I am only asking. He took a step forward, then another, until they stood close as they had when they were little and fought with wooden swords and laughed with bleeding lips. I swore to myself that I would be lord enough for us both. You have a look sometimes, like you belong to the stones more than I do. I belong nowhere, Jon said, and wished he had not, for he could feel the self-pity like a sour fruit in his mouth. He swallowed. Father said I will be Jon Stark. Father said he will ask the king, Robb corrected, and some sharp thing in the words cut them both. He winced first and pressed on. I wanted to say that I mean to be a good lord. Whether you stand beside me or behind me or ahead of me, I mean to keep this house. You are my brother. Jon looked at him, at the boy he had raced across courtyards and down passageways and up towers, at the boy who had shared cold porridge and warm laughter and their father's approval sparingly given and thus precious. You are my brother, he said. Came easy once he let it. Robb's shoulders loosened a little. I hope he returns, he said. When he goes south, I hope he returns and calls all this folly and never speaks of it again. I hope so too, Jon said, and thought of a face carved of milk-white stone and a bed of blue petals. 2 days later the king came, with thunder and velvet and a smell of horse. The Lannister gold streamed through the gate in a bright river. Banners with a lion that had never seen snow. Guards who looked as if they had been cast in metal and lacquered. A queen whose hair was a pennant in the wind. The king himself was a storm in a man's shape, laughing and broad and already drunk on the air of the north. He dismounted as if he had leapt at an enemy and clapped Ned into a rough embrace that smelled of sweat and old memories and spilt wine. Stiff old wolf, Robert boomed, and the yard grinned to hear it. Gods. But you look less like a corpse than last time, and you look more like a barrel that learned to walk, Ned said, and the king's laughter rang off the stone. Ceremonies ate the day. Feasting ate the night. Tyrion Lannister wandered like a clever blackbird, his eyes missing nothing. Joffrey sat his golden horse like a boy who thought the world existed to be sat on. Sansa watched him with hope beating inside her like a trapped lark. Arya petted Nymeria under the table until the dire wolf grew bored and went to sniff the boots of a fry. Jon found himself below the salt, as he always had at great feasts, but he discovered quickly that men glanced at him differently, as if a word hung over his head in letters of fire, air. He did not taste his meat. He drank less than he was offered. Ghost lay beside his bench and accepted pieces of venison with slow, delicate bites. Ned spoke to the king under the great antlered chandelier when the hall had thinned to the happiest and the stubborn. Robert had thrown Catelyn into a whirlwind of bear-sized jests that she parried with elegant exhaustion, and the queen had retreated to her ladies with a smile that said nothing true. The king and the lord had found privacy in a place where all could see them and none could hear above the din. An old trick learned as boys in the Isle of a Sept. Speak, Robert grunted. Say you will be my hand so I can stop asking and start ordering. I will come south, Ned said, and felt Catelyn's cold look cross the hall like the shadow of a hawk. But first I have a boon to beg. Robert groaned. Old friends do not beg, Ned. We steal from one another without shame. What do you want? A cask of the Arbor's best? I have a cask hidden from the queen with a false label, fish sauce. Not wine, Ned said. Names. Robert arched an eyebrow. Names can be wine, sweet or bitter. Whose? This one. Ned inclined his head minutely. Jon stood in shadow beside the pillar 2 aisles over, speaking softly to Arya, who had crept away from her lady's bench. Ghost was a pale blur at his feet. "The boy," Robert said, and the single syllable carried both affection and old grievance. "Your bastard. My blood," Ned said, the words like a knife pulled through himself. "I ask you to legitimize him as a Stark." Robert laughed more softly than he had laughed all day. The laughter grew thoughtful and stopped being laughter at all. "You have sons with your lady, if you have forgotten. The law is a surly dog that bites any hand but the king's. I could do it because I am a bad husband to the law. But your lady will hate you enough to set your bed on fire." "She has cause enough already," Ned said. He did not glance toward Catelyn. Had he done so, he thought he might falter. "I ask it, Robert. Jon has done no wrong. He would have taken the black with my blessing if not for this winter that gnaws at me in my bones. I will leave the north. I will go where knives hide inside smiles. While I am away, I want the north to have a Stark with teeth." Robert chewed at the corner of his beard, eyes gone inward, counting costs and benefits on some scale that had nothing to do with numbers. "You ask in front of the whole of creation," he said at last, nodding at the hall. "If I refused, they would make stories. Or if I refused later, they would laugh inside their sleeves. You were always a more careful drunk than I, Ned. Gods, send me men like you. You will do it?" Ned forced himself to make it a question. "Of course I will do it," Robert snapped, then grinned. "I am the king. I do mad things under the sun all day. Tell your boy to learn how to sit a high chair without falling off. Tell your lady to spit in my ale when I am not looking. We'll have documents with all the proper pretty ribbons by noon tomorrow, and I will put my name on them with the same hand I used to beat Stannis at Sivas." Ned bowed his head. Gratitude rose hot and raw and dangerous, and he swallowed it like strong spirits, letting the burn remind him he was alive. "Thank you," he said. "Do not thank me," Robert said. "Until the Queen's not looking." The Queen was always looking. She looked when Maester Luwin read the charter the next day in the shadows of the heart tree, voice echoing among the roots as if the tree itself spoke. "We do by grace of gods above and under, and by the seal of the king. Jon of Winterfell, issue of the Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell, to be known henceforth as Jon Stark." The name hung in the air like frost. Ghost threw his head back and howled, a low tearing sound that sent dust dripping from the leaves. The wolves answered. The sound might have been joy or grief or simply the music of their blood. Catelyn did not attend. Robb stood with his mouth a thin line and his color high, his fists opening and closing at his sides. He did not step away when Jon went to him after, and their foreheads touched for the first time since the word heir had dropped between them. Sansa smiled prettily for the king and thought 1,000 thoughts that were not pretty at all. Arya stared at the way the wax seal glittered in red knots and asked if she could see the king's dagger instead. Bran tried to climb the heart tree with his eyes. That night hail rattled on the slates like thrown bone. Jon lay awake in the bed he had always had, under a roof that had never belonged to him, and listened to Ghost breathe in the straw. He said his new name, whispering it like a thief testing a stolen key. Jon Stark. It did not unlock anything except the ache behind his breastbone. He found Catelyn in the sept the next evening. He had not sought her. He had sought silence, and time had played one of its small, cruel tricks. She knelt with her hair unbound, the light painting her cheekbones gold. When she heard him, she did not start, nor did she turn. "Have you come to see if I weep?" she asked the altar. "No, my lady," Jon said. "I do not," she said. "Tullus weep when we mean to, not when others think we ought. It is not grief that chokes me, it is fury." He came no nearer, not from fear of her but from knowledge of the distance she had carefully laid like a moat. "I will not take from Robb," he said. "You will," she said calmly. "Not because you mean to steal, because your existence picks pockets. That is not your fault, but there it is. I am a woman who has had her son's shape altered by the hands of men she loves. Tell me, Jon Stark, what should I do with this? How should I love you now? Jon's mouth opened and closed. He had thought of speeches, and all of them were dust. I do not know, he said. I will do what my Lord Father commands. I will do what Robb needs. If it makes it easier, I can. You can die, she finished flatly. Then she closed her eyes and shook her head once. I do not wish that. I wish only for the world I thought I had. Her voice softened, worn thin at the edges. I used to fight for you in my way, when the servants forgot to bring you fresh socks in winter, when Cook asked if he should scrape the bottom of the pot for your share. I thought that was enough and I would be praised in heaven for it. And now heaven comes into my hall with a document and tells me that I must not only feed you, I must yield the high seat to you if your father dies. Forgive me that I struggle. It needs no forgiveness, Jon said. If I could change it, I would. She laughed for the first time in days, and it was a knife. You are your father's son. All of them are. Even the girls. Only I am not his. Go away now. If I speak longer, I will say worse things, and it will be a sin, and I do not need new sins. He bowed and left her in the candlelight that smelled faintly of bees. The king and his bright court were still in the inn. Orth when Bran fell. They said later that the boy had gone climbing as he always did, because some children are born with ropes in their bones. They said he climbed the walls like ivy. They said he went where a boy should not go and saw what a boy should not see. They did not say what the boy heard when his bones broke the air. They did not say what kind of falling it was. He did not die. Sometimes mercy is another kind of fall. The hall of Winterfell changed. Laughter dropped its voice. Boots softened. Breath gathered in doorways and did not go inside. Catelyn sat beside her son's bed with her hair loose and her eyes fixed on a place just above the boy's mouth, as if she could catch the breath that kept leaving there and bring it back to the beginning, to the first moment, to the time before gravity became a lesson. Ned's face carved itself into stone. He kept his hands moving, commands, courtesies, letters, but there were hours that went missing from him. Sansa learned, in those hours, that her mother's silence was a presence, and Arya learned, in those hours, that there is a way a castle holds its breath. Jon did not go to Bran's room. He did not ask himself why. Ghost would not go near the door at all. The dire wolf would growl, low and constant, and the hair lifted along his spine like frost he could not shake. On the fourth night, the man came with the knife. He came in a rain that fell without sound, and he came as if he had been born from the stone floor, and he carried in his hand a blade of steel so pale it looked like a piece of moonlight that had chosen to be a weapon. He smelled of oil and the road and of something else that Ghost knew at once and Jon only saw later. Fear dressed up as purpose. Catelyn was a shape in the candle smoke, her hair a net about her face. The nurse snored into her apron beside the bed. The man moved lightly, a good thief, a good killer. He would have been better if the direwolf had not been sleeping under the bed. When Ghost struck, the sound was not an animal sound. It was a soft detonation of everything the world had been a moment before. The man went down with a cry that did not leave his throat because fangs were there first. Jon woke to the cry that did not happen. He was already moving when he was awake, and he did not think until he was inside the room with the rain pushing at the open window and the dire wolf ripping at the hand that held the blade. Catelyn's chair clattered to the floor. The nurse came up with a shriek like a seagull and then fell over the rug and wept without moving. Jon's hand closed on the man's wrist, feeling the tendons slide like ropes, and the knife's point turned toward him. He could see himself in that sliver of death, a boy with his hair wet and his teeth clenched, a boy who had chosen not to call for help because calling would take too long. Catelyn grabbed the man's ear with both hands and tore. It was not ladle-like. It was not anything but grief with a target. The man jerked. The knife bit Jon's palm and then was gone. And then there was blood, so much blood that later he would remember the smell of it as if it were a song. Ghost moved his head with a workman's patience, and the man was finished. They bound Jon's hand with linen while he watched the red drip and felt it as nothing more than a warm inconvenience. The blade lay on the floor where it had fallen, quivering slightly as if it still meant to be used. Maester Luwin's voice spoke from far away and then came nearer, and the nurse's sobbing faded to a hiccuping drone, and Catelyn's hands were on Jon's face, his neck, his hair, touching him for the first time since she had called him not son. "You saved him," she said, and she was weeping now, and her weeping was a clean thing, cutting through the foulness like rain. "My boy, you saved him." Jon opened his mouth to refuse the word and could not. He took it. Catelyn held him while the maester threaded the needle through his flesh, and Ghost lay down and put his head on Bran's ankle and closed his red eyes as if prayer could be learned by beasts. The morning after, the castle had one tale and one name on its breath, and men said both the name and the tale differently depending on whether they loved the boy they named. Ned was the same man, but he was also not. He saw the knife and knew that it was better than steel. "Valyrian," he said softly, touching the rippled metal with a finger that knew swords. "Such knives are not for hedge cutthroats. They are for princes and the men who serve them." Catelyn left that day, riding south with only Roderick to keep her company, her eyes fixed on the road as if she could outpace the fear running at their heels. She walked into a snare woven by old loves and new lies, as the South always offered. She was not there when the king left. She was not there when Sansa rode beside the boy with hair the color of ripe wheat and eyes like a cat's. She was not there when Arya asked if she might bring Needle to the city and Ned said no and then said yes and wondered when the word yes had grown so heavy. She was not there when Ned said goodbye to the stone faces of his fathers and to his son who had a new name. "I will keep the North," Jon told him, standing on the battlements with the wind trying to pry them loose from the world. "You will keep Winterfell," Ned said. He could not bring himself to say more. All his oaths were wires pulled taut through the world, and each of them cut him a little when he moved. "Listen to Luwin. Listen to Roderick. When the bannermen come, greet them first in your head and only then with your tongue. Men like to think you think of them before you think of yourself. If the snow bites hard, send for barley early. If the white knife freezes, send word to the Manderleys. They love to be asked for help almost as much as they love to give it. Remember the Ryswells grieve their dead as if grief were an old friend. Remember Lord Bolton smiles when he means not to. And Robb?" Jon asked. He did not name the fear, that he would be stepping into a place that had always belonged to someone else's stride. "Robb is your brother," Ned said. "You will quarrel with him because boys do. You will make peace with him because men must. He will ride south at my command if he must. You will ride north if the wall calls. Do what you must, and remember that every choice feeds either a hungry god or a hungry wolf, and you were born north of the neck." They embraced, awkward as men ignoring the possibility of last embraces, and then the great party rode out under a sky scraped thin by the north wind. Sansa looked back once, and Arya looked back 5 times, and Jon did not look back at all because Ghost's warmth leaned against his leg and because the work of the day had already begun. The bannermen came. They came like weather, the great Jon roaring and shedding snow from his beard as if the snow had insulted him. Tall Heart with a joke as broad as his shoulders, Wyman Manderley sending food and men and a letter green as an old apple assuring Jon of all possible loves and loyalties. Roose Bolton sliding into the hall on quiet feet with quiet men, his pale eyes studying the walls as if he suspected them of treachery. Lady Hornwood with a winter in her mouth. Karstark with sons who stared like hawks. They came, and they looked at the boy king had made Stark, and they measured him against the chair at the dais, against the wolf at his heel, against their own hands. Jon learned quickly which men liked to be taken hunting and which liked to be asked to teach. He learned that the kitchen hour decides the temper of a hall as surely as the hour of judgment does. He learned that Roderick's mustaches moved like banners when he was pleased and like warning pennants when he was not. He learned that Maester Luwin could turn a question into a shield. He learned also that the great Jon would not be managed by courtesy alone. It came on a night when the hall was full and the air warm with men and meat. Snow melted in the rushes and left little puddles that reflected torchlight. The Grachan's laughter filled the room again and again, like the drumbeat beneath a marching song. He had fought 3 men at once that afternoon with blunted swords and had come away with blood in his beard and on his gloves and a hunger for more. They gave him more ale instead. When Jon rose to speak, only a matter of mutton and storage and the rumor that the white knife's mouth had ice on it already, the great Jon stood and interrupted with a grin. "Boy," he bellowed, friendly as a bear deciding whether to hug or maul. "I came to see you, not to be counted barley with. They tell me you have a name now that is not Snow. Names are all very well, but I like to see if a whiskey is whiskey by fire, not by label." A murmur rolled the length of the hall. Robb, at Jon's right hand, sat up straighter. Theon leaned in with a look that said, "Here comes the thing I like best." Roose Bolton watched with the kind of stillness that could be mistaken for sleep. Jon smiled a little and let the smile fade. "I have no taste for whiskey," he said, and the hall laughed on its own, relieved to be told how to behave. "But I have a taste for men who do not insult my hall under my roof." The great Jon's grin widened. "By the gods, you have a tongue. Show me your teeth." Ghost stood in a slow, unfolding motion, his fur lifted by something that was not fear. The room felt the change. Firelight made the direwolf's eyes deeper red, the color of hot iron in a blacksmith's night. The great Jon put his hand on the hilt of the enormous sword on his back as if to steady himself as he laughed. "Please," Robb began. "This is foolishness." Jon put a hand out without looking at him. "My Lord Umber," he said, "you came in winter with men when I asked. For that my thanks are as honest as bread. If you wish to measure me, speak. Do not test the teeth of my wolf with bare flesh." The great Jon cocked his head. "Ah, there is the whiskey after all." He drew the sword a finger's width. The sound was intimate, a whisper from a lover's throat. Words are wind. Steel speaks clearer. It might have gone worse if some of the men had not laughed. It might have gone differently if Ghost had not moved when he moved, and if Jon had not been standing where he stood. The great Jon's sword had teeth like mountain ridges. It licked the air and came down. Jon moved sideways, perhaps a shade faster than the great Jon had allowed him, and reached out with his left hand and slapped the flat of the great blade as if it were no more than a sparring stick. Ghost was already there, weight and hot breath, the jaws closing gently around the great Jon's wrist before the sword had entirely left its scabbard. There was no bite. It was the gentlest thing a wolf like that could do. The great Jon stared at the mouth that could crush his bones and at the animal that had decided not to, and then he threw back his head and laughed in a blast. "Heir," he roared, and for the first time he put the word warm in the air. "By the old gods, you will do." Men banged cups. Men clapped benches. Robb let go a breath he had been holding so long it had a shape. Roose Bolton did not move. His pale eyes were old pennies. Later that night, the ravens came like ink on snow. The letters were from the south. One smelled faintly of roses and blood and said nothing that could be brought into a court and everything that mattered. One had a crabbed hand and the impatience of a man who liked numbers more than men. Stannis wrote like he hammered. One was from Catelyn, words written in motion, the ink spattered by the shaking of a horse's gait. Jon read what he was allowed to read and did not question what he was not. The king was dead, killed by a boar, with Lancel Lannister's wine on his breath and Cersei Lannister's plan in the shadows. The boy who called himself king sat Jaime Lannister's nose on his face, though he called it Robert's. Ned Stark had tried to place the throne in the hands of Stannis as law commanded. The City Watch had sold themselves, as they do, to the tallest purse. Lord Stark was in the black cells. The Queen had Sansa like a coin in her palm. Arya had fled or hidden or become a ghost. Jon slept little. When he slept, he dreamed of walls made of people and knives made of law and of walking a long corridor with men he loved on the other end and never being able to arrive. In the morning, he called the banners. It was Robb who wanted to ride at once with every man and boy who could sit a pony, and it was Jon who said no. It was Roderick who nodded and Maester Luwin who did not smile but stopped frowning. Robb paced the solar like a wolf in a cage while Jon ran a finger along maps worn thin at the folds. "Riverrun burns," Robb said. "Mother will be trapped between the twins and the fords with Lannister men thick as lice. Tywin Lannister's host will come whether we run to meet them or no," Jon said. "If we run without counting, our dead will run beside us." We cannot feed 40,000 men in frost. We cannot cross the neck with a host without drowning half of them. We must move like a knife sliding between ribs, not like a club. I will not be a knife, Robb said, turning hard. I will be a sword. You will be whatever the North needs, Jon said, and the words had the weight of their father's unsmiling mouth. It needs a sword and a sheath. I will hold the neck, you will strike where it hurts. We split and make the Lannisters guess which thread to cut. Robb stopped pacing and stared. You mean to send me south? I mean to ask you to go, Jon said. You are the better horseman and the better at turning men's blood to thunder. I will keep the levies steady and the crossings and the mouths fed. I will make Roose Bolton smile less and Wyman Manderley smile more. I will write to the Watch and send grain and mend the wall's way. If the South devours itself in its own feast, I will see that winter does not devour us. Robb's mouth opened, then shut. Are you ordering me? He asked, and he asked without offense. As a son asks a father what shape the world has taken overnight. I am asking my brother, Jon said. We have no orders left that anyone will respect if we do not give them to ourselves. Roderick cleared his throat. It is good sense, he said, which is rare and thus precious in war. Maester Luwin unrolled another map, this one of the lower Green Fork and the Twins. If the boy Lord Frey can be coaxed to favor you, you will move faster than gouged pigs. If not, you will gnaw your own foot before you cross. I would counsel flattery and a promise you can live with. Promises make hungry wolves, Robb said, but his eyes had changed. There was fire there, but also the fixed light that comes when a boy sees the road under him for the first time and knows he will not slip. I will go. Gray wind will taste southern sheep before the moon turns. Take the great Jon said. Let him roar somewhere, the echoes will frighten the men we want frightened. I will take him so he does not drown you shouting, Robb said, and they both half smiled. They made the preparations in a noise of iron and leather. The northern host rose like a wave. Men came with rakes in their hands and learned to hold spears. Boys lied about their ages and discovered that lies do not grow them any taller. Girls hid knives in their kirtles and learned how to move in halls changed by war like wind moves in the space between leaves. Theon strutted with a joy that was only part pretense. Roose Bolton asked to lead men to the crossings and was told politely no. He smiled in a way that promised he would not forget the word. On the morning Robb rode out, the yard was a theater of breath in the cold and leather creaking and gray winds growl. Sansa did not come down. She was a name in King's Landing now and a bargaining chip and a child with a broken heart. Arya was gone into the south with her father and her sword and her wolf, and nobody could find her shadow. Bran lay still and breathed and had learned not to drown by inches. Rickon clutched at Robb's boot and sobbed and was peeled gently away. Robb looked at Jon across the space of the yard. For a moment the noise fell away, and they were two boys again with straw in their hair and bloodied knuckles, and the future was a thing they would both run toward and not a thing that would hold one back so the other could go first. Brother, Robb said. Brother, Jon said. They kissed as men of the North do, hard and quick, a bruise of affection. Then Robb mounted and rode under the gate and did not look back, because he understood now that looking back, like asking for permission, can become a habit that makes men slow. Jon watched until the last banner had vanished into the morning, then turned and went to work. Letters, always letters, to Manderley and to Barbary Dustin and to Lady Hornwood and to Sir Helman Tallheart and even to the Riswells, because men who feel seen are less likely to be bought cheap. Letters to Lord Commander Mormont at Castle Black, and a wagon train north with oats and dried fish and tallow and men who had failed at everything else but could be taught to stand watch and ring bells. The letter to Mormont he wrote himself, his hand steady, the words pared down until they were bone. He did not write of dreams or wolves howling under a cold moon. He wrote, Winterfell will stand with the Night's Watch. If you need men, take them from our jails and we will not ask for them back. If you need food, ask and we will give until it hurts our guts, because it will hurt our guts more if the wall falls. If you need a Stark, send word. I will come. The answer came with more speed than he expected and less than he feared. a strip of parchment smudged with soot and urgency. The hand was bold, as if the quill were a small sword and the writer a man who did not waste such weapons on flourishes. The words were not stylish. They were only true. "We have dead men walking," the letter said, and Jon read it twice and then put his hand on the table because the room shifted. He took Ghost to the Godswood and read the letter again beneath the weirwood's bleeding leaves. He remembered the old stories, the ones told under firs with the night breathing against the tent walls, stories of blue eyes in the dark and of spears that shattered and of kings with crowns of ice. He had not believed them in the way of boys who want to believe only things they can hold up to the light and weigh. He believed them now. It is one thing to be a lord and Count Barley. It is another to be a Stark and Count Winters. Roderick tried to dissuade him, as was his duty. "Send men and send some other son of some other nameless house," he said. "A lord cannot be everywhere he wants to be. A Stark should be where the cold is," Jon said, and he sounded like a page in some book of mottos, which he hated. "The wall is not a story. If we are wrong." Roderick rubbed his mustache until it stood mad with worry. "If you die, who sits the chair? A letter will not get you back if you lose your head to a white or to the first wildling who decides the color of your eyes is an insult." "Then I will not lose my head," Jon said softly. "I will take men who know where their feet go. I will go as far as the wall and not 1 league beyond, and I will give what help is wanted and no more. If you forbid me, I will obey you, and the north will still be the north, but a part of it will be unable to breathe." Roderick turned and spat into the snow and muttered a word that would have made the Septon blush. "Take Jory," he said gruffly, "and take 20 with him, and take a cook because the men tea better when there is a cook, and take your wolf because he is a better friend than any letter you can bring." Jon rode north on a pale day with a pale sun that could not be bothered to do more than watch. The woods seemed to lean in around them, listening. Ghost ranged ahead, a white thought moving through gray trees. The men spoke little. The sound of hoofbeats and the creak of leather made their own conversation. They passed shepherds who watched with narrow eyes. They passed an old man with a cart of turnips whose mouth held so few teeth. He smiled like a skull and still found room for gratitude when Jon took an old coin from his pouch and dropped it in the man's palm. They passed a tower that had lost half its stones to a storm 20 years ago and still stood, because the north stands or it falls all at once. Castle Black rose out of the trees like a thing the earth had been trying to bury and had not yet managed. It was uglier than his boyhood stories, all scaffolds and black wood and the raw edges where stone was missing, but it had a stubborn grace. The wall itself made men bite down on curses to keep them from running out of their mouths and freezing in the air. It was a mountain made man's shape and made man's sin. It made men look small and feel smaller. It made Ghost look like something the wall had born in a dream. Mormont received Jon in a room that had more maps than furniture and more men than space. The Lord Commander's hair was a siege's last snow. His hands were scarred. His eyes had crow's feet deeper than most crows. He grunted when Jon offered his name and his father's and the king's seal and did not bow, because crows do not bow unless there is bread on the floor and a woman watching. "We have dead men walking," Mormont said without preamble, as if he were continuing a conversation they had begun sometime in a different life. "They burn at night and try to strangle you in your sleep. They make poor guests. We have rangers who do not return. We have a king's son with hair like a woman's and a sword he can barely lift who thinks he is at war with his own shadow because the shadow keeps showing him he is a boy. We have a great deal of snow. I brought food and men," Jon said. "Not enough, never enough. But some. Good. They will shit more than they fight and complain more than they shit, and I will love them better than sons." Mormont's look pierced. "You are Lord Stark in all but name while your father finds a new way to die. You should not be here. I should be wherever the north is in danger," Jon said. Mormont snorted. "You have the look of your father in the mouth when arrogant. I loved your uncle. I will not say it to you. Eat, sleep. Leave me your cook and your men and your provisions and go back to your chair. That is my counsel. I will trust you to take it like a young lord." Jon did not sleep, not at first. The wall sang at night, a high thin cry like wails in old sailors' tales. He walked along its base with Ghost and listened to the song and told himself he was learning it, told himself he would take it home and sing it to men who laughed at stories. The cold had teeth up here, and it did not mind biting a Stark. On the second night, the Rangers brought back a body with blue eyes. It did not look like a monster. It looked like a man who had forgotten how to stop being cold. They put him in a cell and put a guard on the door and put themselves in the hall with light and mulled wine and said the words men say when they do not wish to say I am afraid. At a little past the time an old septon in the south might call midnight, the guard screamed, and the screaming sounded like the tearing of heavy cloth. Jon was quicker than most because Ghost had woken him with a noise he had never made before, a sound like a question with its throat cut. He was in the corridor with a torch and his own short blade and no time to think about the fact that steel from the south had no stories that matched the one needed here. The thing came toward him like water under a new skin. Its eyes were blue like frost with a light inside that had chosen to be cruel. Jon's torch did what iron could not, which is how men learned anything at all in the first place. By accident and desperate repetition. He thrust the brand into that face and the face disliked it. It recoiled and then set itself on fire without the courtesy of screaming like a human. Ghost hit it from the side and worried it like any other thing that tried to harm one of his pack. Afterwards, the hall smelled of hair and pitch and bad dreams. Mormont put a heavy hand on Jon's shoulder and grunted approval without flattery. "You will get men killed anyway," he said, "but fewer. That was well done." Mormont gave him a sword the next day, and not because he had earned it by saving a bear the way another boy might have. The blade looked like night has edges when the moon is thin. "The boy I meant to give this to has a different gift now," he said, grim and not telling the story. "He does not want steel. Take it, Stark. It wants a hand that knows where to put it." The blade was not Longclaw. It was leaner. It had been made for a different house maybe, with a different animal on its hilt long filed down. It sang when it left the sheath. Jon tested its weight and found that the song it sang in his hand harmonized with something in his lungs. He left the wall 3 days later because he had promised Roderick he would not be a fool, and because a lord does not decide his wants are the North's wants in perpetuity. He left men and food and his name in a ledger of men Mormont trusted. He left his cook, who had learned to make porridge less like punishment. He left a promise to come again if asked, and he meant it. Winterfell received him with a relief that it was careful not to put into words, because relief put into words becomes debt, and no one likes to be in debt, least of all men with swords. The castle seemed warmer, but that was only because the cold in his bones had moved a step deeper. He dreamed of blue eyes in the dark. He dreamed of snow falling like ash, and of a girl running with a sword that had a name, and of his father kneeling and saying nothing because speaking would unmake the world. News from the south arrived in a broken line of ravens. Robb had swept through the Twins with Frey men finally persuaded that they liked being on the side of something that might be remembered as honor in the songs. He had broken Jaime Lannister on the Green Fork, not with strength alone but with the kind of luck that looks like the gods' favor when it happens to men you love and the gods' indifference when it happens to men you fear. He had outfoxed Tywin once and would not do so again because men like Tywin learn. He had sent scouts to the Whispering Wood and had come out with the Kingslayer on a rope. He had made the Riverlords fall in love with their own valor again. And in King's Landing, Joffrey Baratheon had done what Joffrey did. He had chosen a cruelty for the taste of it. When the day came for judgment, when the city groaned under a heat that turned tallow to soup and the smell of the river to a weapon, he had called for a sword and for a man with a strong arm and had made a nation watch as a head fell into a basket. A girl screamed until her throat bled. A man in a spider's web tucked his fingers into his sleeves and watched his plan wither and another plan bloom like mold. Men who had never met Eddard Stark decided that he had been a fool, and others decided that he had been the only man in any story they had ever heard who had not been a fool. The head was a head. The body was a body. Crows came. In the north, men went to their knees and then to their feet. There were speeches, and one speech that would be remembered as if it had been less awkward than it was, and a crown of bronze with iron spikes hammered by men whose fathers had not hammered such crowns in some hundreds of years. Robb became a king beneath oaks, and the great Jon bellowed the loudest and the earliest. and for a time even Roose Bolton let the corners of his mouth turn up, which is how men knew they were at war for real. The raven that brought the news to Winterfell came close on the heels of one that told Jon the crown's price in blood. He read both letters and sat a long time without moving, and then he went to the hall without ceremony. The men eating their noon stew looked up. The crackle of the fire spoke while he found his legs. "Lord Eddard Stark is dead," Jon said. It was the first time he had said the words aloud, and they made a shape in the air that hurt his throat going out. "Robb has been named king in the north by the river lords and our bannermen." He waited for the murmur, for the astonishment, for the arguments. What came was quiet and then a deep humming sound that rose like something found far under the ice. Men touched their knives. Men nodded once, as if they had just seen a truth they had always expected. Men said the words softly that had not been said in their grandfather's time. "King in the north." The sound put hair on the air. Lady Hornwood stood. "And you, Lord Stark?" she asked. He blinked. "I am no lord," he said, and some of the men laughed because the boy had courtesy but less sense. The laughter was gentle. He saw himself then as they saw him. The king's seal in his chest, the wolves at his heels, the chair at the dais, the name, the stubborn mouth. "I am Warden of the North while the king fights," Jon said slowly. "I will be what the North needs." "The North will need a treaty with itself," Roose Bolton murmured. His voice was cool water from a well with something dead at the bottom. "A king in the Trident, a warden in Winterfell. Men will like it if you both find ways to show that you do not mean to eat what the other hunts." "We will," Jon said, and he looked at Bolton with a face that held nothing. "I will hold the neck and the wall. The king will hold the south of the river. I will send men and bread where they are wanted and not ask the names of their fathers first. I will not steal his glory, because glory is food for singers, not for winters. I will ask that he not steal my men's grain. That is all." Bolton smiled as men smile when they have not got dinner but can smell it cooking. "Prudent," he said. "Starks have always been prudent. It is why men sigh in the south when they say the word Stark. Men in the south sigh because they are far away," Theon said cheerfully from the fire. "When war gets close, men stop sighing and start checking their boots." Letters multiplied. Jeor Mormont wrote in a hand like a blunt blade, "We must send a great ranging, or we will not learn what is coming until it is inside our houses. Send men if you can spare them. Send good men if you cannot." Robb wrote of his desire to put a rope around Cersei's neck and pull until she made a sound he had never heard her make. Sansa, a letter in a strange quavering hand pretending to be her own, wrote politely and told Jon nothing at all except that she was still alive and that sometimes the moon looked like a basin of milk poured out too fast. Jon took his sword and his wolf and went into the woods more than he had used to, because the trees did not ask him for grain or for men or for names, and because the trees kept counsel. When he returned one afternoon with snow on his hair and burrs in Ghost's tail, he found a man at his table with a face he had last seen caught between contempt and interest over a horn of wine in the great hall. Tyrion Lannister. The dwarf stood on a chair because he was one of those men who understood the geometry of power and adjusted for it. He held a cup he had not been offered and smiled a little as Jon came in. "You are hard to find in your own house," Tyrion said. "But I suppose that is what it is to be a lord. Men can find you easily when they wish to trouble you, less easily when they wish to please you." "You are a bold guest," Jon said. "It is not a good time for Lannisters to come to Winterfell." "It is not a good time for Lannisters to go anywhere," Tyrion agreed pleasantly. "We are the worst kind of coin, spent and then blamed for the sharpness of our edges. I come not as a lion but as a crow, a messenger only, and perhaps as a man who remembers a boy who sat below the salt and looks at the world straight on." "That boy has a different name," Jon said. "Yes," Tyrion said softly. "I heard. I am a bastard too, and I did not even have to be unlegitimized first. There are advantages. Less is expected of us, and so we surprise. I bring you a message from your sister, the one who likes songs. She is not allowed to send messages without the queen's hand inside them." She is allowed to send messages with the Queen's hand inside them. Read it and enjoy whatever flavor it has. Jon took the letter. It was Sansa's careful hand, Sansa's careful words, Sansa's careful nothing. At the bottom, where there might have been a blotch, there was a tiny smear as if the pen had stuttered. Nothing else. "Thank you," Jon said. "What do you want for this courtesy?" "Courtesy," Tyrion said. "You wound me. I bring it because I can and because I enjoyed Winterfell when last I was here and because I enjoy being in places where the North looks at me like a toy and I get to prove I am a blade. I want nothing but a room that does not smell of bedpans and the pleasure of watching you try to be two men at once without splitting." "You have a talent for phrases," Jon said. "Eat and drink. Then ride before night falls too hard. Men who look like you do not fare well in the dark here. Men who look like me do not fare well in the light anywhere," Tyrion said. He drank. "Take care of your brother. The South will want him dead. The South will settle for him captured. The South will use him to hurt you if it cannot do anything else useful with him. The South cannot reach as far as it thinks," Jon said, though he knew that was a lie. "Stories can reach anywhere. So can ravens. So can fear." They sent more men to the wall. They held the neck, and Moat Caelan's old unforgiving stones chewed men to pieces when they tried to pass without permission. They sent Manderley ships to White Harbor with 3/4 the grain the coastal villages wanted and promises like ropes to tie up impatience. The snows began early, tentative at first and then less polite. Wolves came down from the hills and took dogs. The lakes disappeared by degrees, first covered over with delicate glass and then with ice that would hold a man for 2 steps and then break and take him, and then with ice that would hold a man and a horse and then crack loudly just to make both of them doubt everything they knew. There were whispers of Ramsay Snow in the Dreadfort's shadow, whispers of flayed fingers and of men who claimed to have been hunters but did not know a stag's track from a sow's. Jon listened and said little. He thought about sending a letter to Roose that said plainly, "I know what you breed in your dark rooms." He did not send it. Some letters make dogs bite. One night in early deep winter, when the castle sounded different because snow changes the way sound moves, a raven came from the wall with a message that was not Mormont's hand. It was rough, as if the quill had been sharpened with a knife and the man had sharpened the knife on his teeth. "Wildlings gathering by the thousands," it said. "Not raids. Not little bands. We see fires north of the Frostfangs like a second dawn. There is a king beyond the wall. He is calling all his dear home. If we do not hold them, they will not stop at your fields. We will need men." Jon stood and felt the line down his back that had always felt like a rope pull tight. He thought of wars to the south that had kings and crowns and armor that gleamed and standards for men to die beneath. He thought of wars to the north that had no songs and would eat the world and not even be proud of it. He went to the heart tree in the dark and put his hand on its bark and said nothing at all, because he did not think gods cared for prayers as much as they cared for actions. In the morning, he told Roderick to send to every holdfast within a week's ride for men who had seen snow on the inside of their beards. He told Luwin to send ravens to men who had laughed at him for writing too often. He told Theon to ride east and harry poachers into soldiers and to smile when he did it so they would not notice what was happening to them. He told the steward to slaughter the worst of the hogs and hang the meat where the frost would make it last. He told the cook to turn the bag of good onions into something that would make men forget they were eating carrot soup every night. He took his sword and his wolf and 50 men who had no idea what they were walking toward, which is a better number than none, and he rode north again. The war in the south made songs while they went. The war in the north made silence. The land beyond the wall is not a land as men inside the wall understand it. It is a church with no God willing to say its name out loud. The sky is closer and farther, both. Ghost bounded ahead and came back and went again, drawing a white line through the world. The men followed reluctantly and then less reluctantly and then with a kind of fierce joy that had nothing to do with glory and everything to do with feeling small for once for a reason that made sense. The world is big and does not care. Men like being reminded. It makes their own smallness less insulting. They met the first wildlings 3 days beyond the wall, in a forest where the trees were so thick that men moved through them like worms through meat. The wildlings had eyes that looked hungry and hands that looked resigned. They came with sticks and knives and with children in their arms. They came as if they had always been coming and had merely stopped for a long while to catch their breath. Jon raised his hand, and the men behind him raised their spears, and then Jon lowered his hand again because something had moved in him at the sight of a girl with a rag tied around her head carrying a boy with hair the color of brown leaves. He spoke, and the words were not the words he had prepared. "We do not kill people who want to live," he said, loud enough to carry. "We kill things that want us dead." A woman who might have been 20 and might have been 40 and might have been any age at all in a world like this looked at him with eyes that had already buried too many things. "Everything wants you dead," she said. Her voice was flat and true. "Even the snow, when it can manage it. We will kill only as much of everything as we must," Jon said. "Go to the wall. Tell them Jon Stark sent you. Tell them if they do not open the gate, I will come back and break it. Then go under it and stay on this side." "Your side?" A man spat. "No," Jon said. "The side that men live on. The side with onions." They went. The men behind Jon looked at him with expressions that moved quickly through confusion and disapproval and settled on something like relief. They had expected to kill. Killing makes some things simple. But living makes other things possible. Farther north, where the skin of the world gets thinner, the wind started to speak a language that horses understood and did not like. The fires the wildlings had left behind looked like bruises on the snow. They found a village where the doors had been broken down and the people had left in a hurry. They found a place where the snow had been stained with blood that did not look like it had come out of men's bodies. They found a boy half frozen under a heap of pelts, his fingers blue, his eyes open. When they pulled him out and gave him hot soup, he began to cry quietly, as if to keep from bothering anyone. Ghost curled around him like a pale hearth. On the last day before Jon admitted he had taken his men as far as pride could go, Ghost stopped dead and growled a sound that came from a place wolves go in their minds when they are ready to leave this world if they must. Jon lifted his hand. The men stopped. The air held its breath. Snowflakes that had been falling leisurely a moment before seemed to hang. Something moved in the trees ahead. It moved like smoke, and it did not make any sound at all. Jon knew then that he had come far enough to find the thing he had been looking for, and that the finding was the mistake and the wisdom both. The thing stepped into sight and stepped back again, as if it were letting him see just enough to make fear an honest thing. Its eyes were the eyes Mormont had described, blue with a light in them that was not humane. It held a sword that looked like glass and like nothing at all, both. It smiled without moving its mouth. Jon did not draw. It would not matter if he did. He lifted the torch he had made himself because he had learned as a boy that making a thing gives a man more courage to use it. The thing recoiled without moving. Snow hissed against the torch. "We will go now," Jon said. His voice sounded like a man's voice when a man speaks from a place deeper than his throat. "We will tell men south of ice that the old things are new again, and we will come back with fire enough." The thing watched and did not follow. The men moved backward without turning their backs, because that is a rule that does not have to be written. Ghost went last, head low, teeth showing in a way that was more promise than threat. They reached the wall, and then they reached Winterfell, and then they reached the next winter, which is what time does. It reaches you. Robb's letters came with snow on them sometimes because messages learn the habits of the roads they travel. He had won and lost and won again. He had made a treaty and broken it and learned something about himself that made him write less often and with more honesty. The singers were beginning to make him into a thing no real man could live up to. He missed his father, he did not say it. He missed his brother, he did not say it either. He wrote instead, "Hold the north. Keep the wall. Keep my name alive in halls I may never see again." Jon did these things as if he had been born knowing how. He learned to sleep 4 hours a night and not become cruel for lack. He learned which men to put near each other and which to keep at opposite ends of any table. He learned that grain is a better ally than any lord. He learned that sometimes the letters you do not answer are as important as the ones you do, and that sometimes you must answer a letter with a man on a horse rather than with ink. He learned to speak to the heart tree without expecting a reply. He went to see Bran every morning before his first duty and every night after his last. The boy spoke more now than he had. He spoke of dreams in which he flew. Jon did not tell him not to. He told him instead to remember to look down when he flew. A man who flies and forgets to look down will break his neck the first time he returns to earth, he said, which sounded like wisdom even if it only meant, I am afraid for you in ways I do not know how to say. Rickon sulked and ran and bit and then began to soften the way boys do when the world shows them a little kindness where they expected none. He and Shaggy Dog learned which halls they could run in and which they could not. Jon did not scold him unless the scolding would do something. Rickon loved him for that in the noisy way children love. Jon let himself be loved and did not count it a debt. Catelyn returned once, passing through Winterfell like a wind out of the east. She had less hair and more eyes. They stood in the courtyard and looked at each other through the breath rising from their mouths. You saved my son, she said again, as if the words had been waiting behind all the others she might have spoken. I will keep saving him, Jon said. She nodded. She touched his arm briefly and then left her hand hanging in the air a fraction too long, as if she had meant to do something else and thought better of it. Keep my memory of my husband, she said suddenly. The singers will make him someone else. They always do that with dead men. Keep the man who drank too much ale once and sang too loudly at my father's name day. Keep the man who made a wooden horse for Rickon and smashed his thumb and swore and apologized to the horse. Keep the man who looked at me once after a fight and made me young again by how he looked. Keep him, and when the winter is over, give him back to me. I will, Jon said, and he meant, I will try to keep the pieces the world does not want to keep. She rode away. The yard threw up a flock of ravens that settled again in slow astonishment. In the spring that was only pretending to be spring, a delegation came from White Harbor led by Wyman Manderley, who had found a way to be both fatter and graver. He bowed with a creak that made men smile carefully, because Wyman's weight was both joke and weapon. He brought news of salt and of ships and of a daughter who sang well and had married a man who did not deserve it. He brought flour and barrels of pickled herring and an opinion about everything. He listened to Jon's plans to fortify Moat Cailin and to send a permanent garrison to the Shadow Tower and to ask Bear Island to teach men how to move in woods as if they were born there. He nodded. Sensible, he said, and sensible in a Manderley's mouth is almost as good as sacred in a Septon's. Expensive. The South eats coin and shits ashes. We will save a little out of the pantry and a little out of the harbor and a little out of the phrase, gods blast them, and we will find a way to pay. You are your father's son. It is a compliment. Jon inclined his head. The songs are about kings, he said. My father was a lord. Kings do not last, Manderley said. Lords last as long as their bread does. Make good bread. He peered at Jon over bread that was very good indeed. We will need a marriage, you know. The North gets nervous if bachelors hold chairs for too long. It remembers stories of bastards that turned out to be wolves in bad clothes. Jon did not wince. He did not think of red hair and blue roses that had never been his to think of. He ate his bread and said, perhaps when winter is not pressing. I have many marriages to make that are not mine. You have a talent for losing arguments without letting the other man know he has won them, Manderley said. I approve. It saves time. He licked salt from his fingers. The South will ask for you. It will ask for your blood to wash in some bowl. It cares a great deal about blood, the South, and very little about what holds blood inside a man in the first place. The South will have to ask louder, Jon said. My ears are full of snow. Manderley laughed like an avalanche. Sometime after the thaw that was not a thaw, a girl came to Winterfell with hair like river mud and a sword hidden poorly under her cloak. She walked like a boy and looked like a wolf who had learned to be a person. She was thin as a whip and twice as likely to strike. Jon knew her at once. He did not run. He waited. He let her come close and then closer and then close enough that he could smell road on her and something that was not road but wanted to be. He did not speak. He opened his arms. Arya was there, head against him, breath sharp, body shaking in a way that said the shaking did not concern her yet and would when she was alone. Ghost nosed her hair with a small woof that sounded like an old story being told again. "You are late," Jon said into her hair. "I had things to do," Arya said into his chest. "You always do," Jon said. "I killed a man," she said then, muffled. "He was gonna kill a friend and I killed him first. I did not like it. I will do it again if I must." "I know," Jon said. "Keep your list. Some of the names will fall off by themselves. Some of the names you will scratch away. Some of the names will try to scratch you. Keep the list anyway." "I lost Nymeria," Arya said. "I let her go so they wouldn't find her. She is somewhere north of everything with her own pack. I dream of her sometimes." "She dreams of you too," Jon said. She tipped her head back and looked at him with a face that had more angles than it had had when she left. "You look older. You look more like yourself," Jon said. She stayed a while. She ate enough to make Cook smile. She slept with her hand on her sword and with Ghost in the doorway. She would not say much about the road because the road had taught her that words get stolen and used against you. She went to the Godswood and looked at the face in the heart tree and did not cry, and the tree did not mind. The old gods are not the kind that demand tears. She stood in Bran's room and touched his hand and left a little knife beside his bed where everyone could see it. In the morning she said, "I have to go. There's a man who taught me to dance and he did not run and I need to find out where his bones went. There's a fat boy who protected me in the Red Keep and I need to see if he learned to protect himself. There is a thing I am supposed to do, and I don't know what it is, and I won't find it sitting." "I know," Jon said. He gave her dried meat and a handful of copper stars and a ring that had belonged to a Stark who died in a different winter and that nobody particularly wanted, and that would buy her a bed in some inn where beds were rare. He gave her a name to use at White Harbor so that someone would put her on a ship if ships were needed. He gave her a long look. "Kill no one who might give you bread later." "I can't promise that," she said gravely. "Try," he said. "I will try," she said, and she grinned. And the grin was the same as it had been when she was 9 and stole cakes. They hugged again and did not say goodbye because women with swords do not waste time on words that make their throats hurt. She walked out under the gate and was gone, and Ghost watched her go until she was a smudge and then a thought and then a memory. The winter deepened. The war in the South did what wars do, turned into a story whose moral depended on who was telling it. Robb won, and then he did not. He made a marriage for love and lost a crossing for pride and learned a lesson too late for it to be worth the lesson. He held a crown in a tent at night and stared at it as if it had become suddenly heavier. He wrote less, and when he wrote it was strange. The letters of a boy who was becoming a man, and then the letters of a man who was becoming a myth, and then the letters of a myth who wanted to be a boy again for one day with no blood on his hands. The letters stopped. No raven came to say why. Men did not ask. They grew quiet and then more determined. The way men do when hope and dread are the only things left on the table, and neither one fills a belly. Jon kept Winterfell and the Wall and the North and his father's ghost. He kept them with careful hands, and he learned how to be two men at once without splitting entirely. He learned that sometimes being a Stark meant telling the truth when lies would save you a wound. He learned that sometimes being a Stark meant choosing the wound. When word came at last, it came from far away and near at once, like thunder. It said, "Fry." It said, "Wedding." It said, "The river ran red and did not wash clean for days." It said, "Drums in a hall and knives in the dark, and a wolf's head for a crown and a crown for a wolf's head," said Robb. Jon went to the crypt and sat with Stone Kings. He took the sword Mormont had given him and laid it across his knees and stared at the bronze woman who had been a queen before queens were made of silk. He did not cry. He did not say his brother's name. He had no gods to bargain with and no bargains they would have wanted to make. He sat until the rushlights burned low and one went out, and then he stood. He went to the hall and he called the banners again, not for war against men but for winter against all things. They came, and if their eyes were redder and their mouths tighter, that was how men looked when they had swallowed grief and could not cough it up. He sent a letter to White Harbor and to Bear Island and to the Dreadfort and to Barrowton and to Skagos and to Last Hearth and to the petty houses that have no songs and the petty men who make the houses matter. He wrote, The North will not kneel to the men who broke bread and then broke oaths. The North will starve them one by one, in hall and field and bed and dream. The North will light fires on her walls and at her heart, and whatever comes out of the woods will find fire enough. He wrote to the wall soon. He looked at Caitlin when she came, and he did not say the word condolence because it is a stupid word. He stood with her in the yard while the snow fell and the wind braided her hair, and he held her arm so she would not fall because the ground had become treacherous without warning. "They killed my son," she said as if it were a new thought, a thought she would think every day from now until she died. "They killed a king under a roof." "They did," Jon said. "I will not forgive," she said. "You do not have to," Jon said. "They killed my son," she said again softly, and then she made a sound like a bird struck with a stone, and then she straightened and looked at him as if she had found a rope and would not let it go. "Keep this house," she said. "Keep this name. Keep the thing that makes men say Stark and think of stone and winter and bread. Keep it and do not let them eat it away with knives dressed as marriage and treaties dressed as peace. Keep the wall." "I will," Jon said. He did. The winter did what it always does. It wanted to be remembered, put its teeth into men's calves and held on. The dead walked sometimes and were burned sometimes and learned slowly to fear fire like any other simple thing. The wildlings came south in waves that outlasted breath and battled with children and kettles and dogs. Some of them fought. Most of them lived because Jon decided to love the living more than he loved winning. When he grew tired, he slept. When he woke, he worked. When he thought of his father, he did not see a great man's head on a spike. He saw a hand on his shoulder that had guided without humiliating. When he thought of his brother, he did not see a hall with musicians who had chosen to play murder. He saw a boy with his hair burning red in the sun who had once jumped from the stable roof into a pile of hay and come up laughing and full of straw. When the first true spring came, the one that did not melt and then freeze and then melt again but melted and stayed melted, Jon walked down to the pool in the godswood and put his hand into the water. It was cold still. It would always be cold, but it did not bite. The face in the heart tree watched and said nothing. The ravens muttered. Ghost lay with his chin on his paws and watched the ripples. A new generation of Winterfell children ran across the yard with wooden swords and wooden spoons and wooden wolves on their belts and learned to mind their feet and their mouths and the weight of their names. Jon Stark stood in the shadow of an old tree and the ghosts of old men and felt the North breathe around him, slow and stubborn and alive. He did not know what would come next because men do not. He knew only that whatever came would find the house ready and the wolves with their teeth clean. He had been a boy with no name that could stand in the light. He had been an heir and a brother and a warder and a sword and a sheath and the place where the breath of winter warmed itself for an instant before it went on its way. He would be all these things until they were no longer needed. Then he would be a man with a scar where a wolf's teeth had once gentled a giant and a memory of iron in his mouth and a taste for bread made honest. He would be a Stark because a wolf belongs to the pack and the pack belongs to the forest and the forest belongs to the cold and the cold belongs to the old gods and the old gods, if they belong to anything at all, belong to men who keep vows. He turned from the water and walked back into the day. The world was large. His house was not. That was the point. He would make it enough. He would hold it like a bowl full of hot soup and give it to those who came with empty hands and honest hunger. He would keep the North and the wall and the winter and the wolf, which is to say, he would keep faith. Snow fell in April, then in May, then stopped. The summer that followed smelled of pine pitch and cut hay. Somewhere beyond the neck, men told stories about kings and ended them with blood and sex and songs. In the North, old men told children about a winter where the wolves sang more than the minstrels did, and they ended those stories with bread and fires that did not go out and a boy who became a man because the world required it. If the old men said the boy had been made a Stark by a piece of parchment sealed with a stag, or by a king, or by a father's stubborn mouth, they said it with shrugging mouths that made it clear that the paper had mattered less than the bread, and the king had mattered less than the wall of stone, and the father had mattered most of all because he had decided to make a truth that would last through a winter. Under the heart tree, red leaves fell on water that remembered and forgot in the same breath. The face carved in the white wood watched as it had always watched. It did not speak because it did not have to. Men spoke, and then men worked, and between those two things the North lived. Ghost drifted in and out of the shade, a coolness moving through the world, and when he lifted his head at dusk to listen to the night, the sound he made was not a howl. It was something lower and calmer and more satisfied, like a wolf counting his pack and finding none missing. Jon stood in the doorway of the great hall at last light, a moment big enough to hold, and watched men eat and women laugh and children fight over a scrap of fat like princes. He watched fires and faces and bread. He put his hand on the stone and felt it warm from the day. He did not think of the South. He did not think of crowns. He thought of the way snow eats sound and the way spring gives it back, and he thought, this is the right size for my heart. He turned toward the sound of a boy in the yard shouting for a lesson, and toward the sound of a girl in the kitchens asking how much salt goes into stew, and toward the sound of a wolf scratching at the door to be let out into the dark. He answered all of them in turn with the same word, yes.